Right, let's get started. 2 minutes past our starting time, so we've had the opportunity for people to filter in, and more people will be coming in. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are coming in from. We had a really good, strong registration for this webinar. My name is Dan Trolero, Managing Director of Education and Fair Play for IC360, and you're here on the topic of investing in integrity, the case for statewide collegiate gambling education programs. And we're going to talk about why that's important, what we're seeing, and just kind of the landscape. But before we do that, just a couple of housekeeping items. Again, please use the chat to communicate. Keep yourselves on mute. If you have a question, type it in the chat and we'll get to them towards the end. This is going to go about 30 minutes, and then we'll leave time for Q&A at the end. So we want to be respectful of everyone's time, and we want you to pick up a bunch of points along the way and have your opportunity to ask questions. But before we do that, Ryan, why don't you take a couple minutes, tell people who you are and why you're here.
Pleasure to meet everybody. Thank you, Dan. My name is Ryan Tatusco, the Director of Education here at IC360. Previously, I was a Division One collegiate student athlete at Indiana State University. I also played 7 years of professional baseball inside of the Texas Rangers organization, as well as the Washington Nationals, and then spent a year overseas. But with that, I am also a lived experience problematic gambler that's in recovery right now. And so, along with Dan, we travel around and share our experiences and try to help the next generation understand what their landscape looks like with them being in the land in the space, and then also kind of share my personal experiences about what I went through, how I got to the point to where I was, and just really try to bring to light really what this world is kind of starting to shape up and looks like for the next generation.
Thank you, Ryan. And you and I have worked together now for a few years, actually,
Yeah.
from our previous employer, and continue to do the good work here with IC360. And we'll get into what that looks like. Myself, Dan Trolero, I know many of you on here, and for the new names and soon to be faces, so hopefully someday get a chance to meet. I too am in recovery. My journey of recovery started February 11th of 2010 from an addiction to sports betting, cards, gambling in general. I did not have a healthy relationship with gambling my entire life, and we'll talk about that and the carefully chosen words there. And my gambling as a former athlete, played high school ball, scouted by the pros as a pitcher, but unfortunately I had an injury in my high school days that really didn't allow me to play much past Division III, one year of college ball. Ended up getting a degree in finance and economics, working at Goldman Sachs in New York City back late 90s, early 2000s. And September 11th had a massive impact on my life. It changed the trajectory. And the work I do today is nothing I went to school for. It was because after September 11th, I had lost 14 friends, and it set me off on about an 8.5 year prolonged gambling addiction, which ultimately cost me my freedom. Getting sentenced to 6 years state prison, served 4.5 years in the New Jersey prison system. And when I came out, I realized that I want to help the conversation around gambling. We did not talk about gambling like we do with drugs and alcohol, which are also important, but it's important that we highlight gambling, especially as it is growing around the country, state by state, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, so that we can all be on the same page and ask good questions and help our young and emerging adults be aware of this growing concern. So IC360 is a global integrity monitoring and compliance solution firm. We represent leagues, organizations all around the globe. We try to preserve and ensure a safe place for people to wager, for games to carry on, so that there's no inside information, no nefarious activity, people who are struggling. We just want to preserve the integrity of sport, and we work alongside many of you to help do that as well. So we're thankful that you're on here today. But a big piece of all of this is the education. And education and prevention go hand in hand. And we want to get to people as early as possible, whether it's high schools, whether it's college, whatever the age is. So we always want to ensure that our young and emerging adults are being equipped, armed, and empowered to use skills, use tools, and have the knowledge. But Ryan, we spend a lot of time on college campuses, and we'll get into some of the stats and data. So the reason we're here is to talk about college education programs. So what are some of the unique features? What do we see amongst college age individuals? What are you seeing and what do we know about that demographic that makes them maybe vulnerable.
Yeah, with a lot of these populations, 18 to 23, 24 year olds, a lot of them, from our talks, around the country, it's the first time they're away from home. They're able to now make decisions without, mom and dad reining in or really having that fear of someone, over their shoulder. And now they're being influenced from people from, different cultures, and they're making different friends. And they're really, for the first time, although depending on their psychological brains are still developing, they're making decisions for the first time, and they don't have kind of that person to say, hey, you may not want to do this. And they're really starting to identify what their relationship is. Dan, I love the way that you put that, with everything in their world, right? They are identifying, how they can interact, how much of things that they can do. And so, with that, comes the proliferation sometimes of gambling, in terms of if it's sports betting or cards, casinos, whatever it is. And so, they are really trying to explore that and figure it out. And really, when we're looking at the college age athlete, a lot of them are around individuals as well that may not be athletes. And so they're getting input and influence from people that may not be sports betting, and they're able to do it. And so they're really getting kind of some mixed signals. And, we're really trying to educate, number one, college age individuals, is to really recognize what your relationship is with that. And if you can enjoy it in a healthy way, like unfortunately, Dan, you and I could not do, but if you're able to enjoy that in a healthy way, that's wonderful. We want to keep it healthy and fun for, everybody involved. But if you are unable to do that, and you are not a student athlete, then there's, go get help, ask for help, realize what's going on, and do not be afraid to go seek that help. And if you are a collegiate student athlete, there are rules under the NCAA, moniker, that state what you can and cannot do. And we have to follow those rules. We have to abide by those rules. And so really educating, everybody involved, depending on what their situation is and where they lie in that college ecosystem, what they're able to do, what they're permissible to do, because what you can do and what you're permissible to do under, NCAA could be two totally separate things. And, really make sure that they understand what they are, and we can maintain protection for really anybody involved, no matter where you lie on that landscape.
Yeah, well said. It's crazy going to college campuses. I mean, Ryan, you and I this year wrapping up in less than 1 year, maybe even maybe probably 8.5 months time, a very short cycle. We've reached over 50, 55 college campuses. We've delivered education to collegiate student athletes, staff coaches, even non-student athletes, almost 19,000 individuals in the first year. And the insights and the data that we're gathering from every session is impactful. And you just said it right. This is the age of vulnerability, brain development, decision making, and risk taking is the last piece that develops. So we want to make sure that people are exploring their relationship with gambling the same way they would with alcohol, with substance use, with cannabis, right? Because we talk about it in high schools, but we don't talk about it gambling in the high schools. So it really could have an impact on mental health, on protection, habit forming at an early age, which could then lend itself to potential for harm or addiction. Those are the things. It's funny. I was at a school recently in the Midwest, Division I school in the Midwest. And what I said to one of the student athletes afterwards, they came up when we were chatting, they were fascinated that I was in prison. They had never talked to someone who had been in prison before. And what I said, and I say this regularly, is that living in a mental prison is worse than physical prison. Because with mental health, if we're trapped up here, we can't figure things out because we don't have the tools, the skills, we were never taught, then we could stay in there for a really long time. And that's a hard place because as an athlete, athletes are uniquely vulnerable, right? We talk about student college age individuals in general as being vulnerable, but there's certain personality traits that athletes specifically have that can make them even more susceptible to gambling related harm. Ryan, what have you seen just from your time as being a pro baseball player and the work that you're doing alongside myself? What do you see as some of those unique personality traits that might make an athlete a little bit more vulnerable?
I mean, you're exactly right. There's a multitude of things that have we seen, and being able to talk into some one-on-one conversations. You have certain things to where, it's everywhere in the world. They're very understanding of the exposure that they have. As an athlete, they're very keenly aware of what their odds are, what the over under is, what maybe if there's a prop bet on them or not. A lot of these student athletes are very keenly aware of it, which, understand, what's going on. And so they have that pressure. We make a joke all the time, and when I'm talking to the student athletes about competitiveness, a lot of the student athletes, especially when we're at these high level Division I athletes, they're probably the most competitive person that they know, or else they would not probably be sitting there. And I talk about all the time, and Dan, I'm sure you do as well, that the competitiveness just doesn't go away. I have a 4-year-old daughter, and we play Candyland together, and we're just flipping over colored squares. She beats me, I get upset. Like, it's just the competitive nature in me. And so a lot of these student athletes, when they're sitting there, they want to be able to compete, and they want to be able to win. And whether that's cards, or playing video games at home with their friends, or maybe it is going to a casino, they have those competitive drivers where they want to win. And now, we are starting to see the proliferation of NIL money. And for a lot of student athletes, it's the very first time they've had their own money in their own account. And again, we've talked about it, maybe their very first time away from home, and they're in charge of an amount of money that they've never maybe seen before. And so now they don't know what to do. They do understand that maybe going out and drinking alcohol, like you said, or cannabis is not maybe the correct thing to do. But if I want to go to the casino, or I want to do a certain amount of things with that money, then so be it. And so we're seeing this kind of really perfect storm that's forming around the student athlete, that's really making things interesting and hard. And they're making some tough decisions, like you said, Dan, with, being able to now having that brain development late and it being all around them. And they kind of tend to start to think, everybody else is making money doing this thing. I've probably forgotten more about my sport than most people will ever know. So why can't I go make a little bit of money doing exactly what I'm doing? And so again, trying to
Yeah.
educate the student athletes, about, hey, we got to make sure that we do have all of these traits that make us a little bit more susceptible than the general population. And that's why, if these thoughts are things that we have to make sure that we're going and having these conversations so we can stop them, and you do not get in trouble when you've worked your entire life to get to this place that you are.
Exactly. It's a short season, and athletes, we were both athletes. I've also seen student athletes say, they're taught that practice makes them better. That doesn't apply to all things in life. They're taught to listen to coaches. And now when you have a college age individual on social media, YouTube, Twitch, any streaming, TikTok, Instagram, where you're getting advice, I mean, that can become the coach of tomorrow, life after sport. So, that's what we tend to see with athletes. And, we have a lot of representation from different stakeholders on this webinar. We have tribal partners here, we have leagues, we have colleges, we have regulators, we have legislators, government workers. So it's important that we have this conversation. So let's talk specifically about the relationships that we're able to form in 2 states. We're thankful for the partnerships that we've been able to get across the line and begin working on, both in the state of Colorado and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And we're going to talk about those too, because they're both similar yet a bit different. So in the state of Colorado, we partnered with the Problem Gambling Coalition of Colorado, which is the nonprofit supporting people with gambling related issues and harms. And through the Division of Gaming, we were allocated funding to deliver collegiate education programs covering all individuals, not just student athletes. This is NCAA Division 1, 2, 3, junior college, community colleges. You have about 100 institutions of higher learning in the state of Colorado, where we can now go out and specifically target college age individuals based upon demographic, based upon population, to help them understand and explore their relationship with gambling. This improves decision making when they understand odds and probability, when they understand how a product works, when they understand cognitive distortions. One of the hardest things to do for a person who likes to gamble is to stop gambling, because your brain is conditioned to know you'll win every so often. And the problem is you don't know how much you'll win, how often it will happen, or when it will happen next. So it's easy to start chasing, especially when you're talking about this emerging population. So we want to get out ahead of it and normalize the conversation, and also reduce stigma, and then show people where support resources are. We want to keep the community safe, whether we're working with our tribal partners, states, counties, it doesn't matter. We don't want harm. That's why a public health approach is important as well. We want to promote safety, promote fair play, reduce incidents of harm. Ryan, before I get into the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Colorado 2 years ago, we did this program with tremendous success. That's why we're blessed and thankful to have the opportunity to do it again. Something 2 years ago started to bubble up, and it's been growing. Talk to me about what you're seeing on campus as it pertains to athlete threat and harassment, because that's something that we continue to add to our education and explore to help people understand what it looks like. What are you seeing and hearing?
Unfortunately, for the student athlete, the conversations that I've had one-on-one and privately and things that I've seen on social media, it's happening more and more. And really what I get from these athletes and from administrators and things like that is they want to help the student athlete, but they're really stuck between a rock and a hard place. A lot of times when these athletes are signing collective deals or NIL deals or even their own private thing, they have a social media aspect to it. And so they can't, they got to promote their business and promote themselves. And they're trying to uphold what their contract says that they have to do. But also they see the DMs and they see this thing that they're going, that they're doing. And really the athlete feels like they're in a darned if you do and darned if you don't. I know that's not the saying, but we'll keep it PG. But because, in this day and age, we all know how Vegas works, right? They want 50% of the take on either side, and that way they're balanced. And so truly the athlete feels that I could do everything that I'm supposed to do. I can help myself win, and we can hit the over and cover and do everything that we are. But there's going to be a subsect of a population that's really upset because they took the opposite side, or maybe my performance wasn't quite there. And so, a lot of these athletes are battling on how to help. And really the questions that I get is what truthfully can be done, because I'm getting so many DMs and I'm getting so many things. And, I have people on campus, that I go to class with that are making mention that, hey, you were the last leg of my parlay and you didn't hit the over on your points. And they want to say something, but they know they can't because on the flip side, they're afraid of being recorded. They're afraid of having something air on social media where it makes it look like it's their fault. And so, as we're traveling and, I was just at a big Division I institution and I was able to have a roundtable with kind of the senior leadership team in the athletic department. And that was the number one question is like, how can we protect our athletes when they have to be on social media to promote their brand? But also, too, we want to make sure that mental health wise, we understand they're getting pulled in a million different directions. And we want to make sure that we can continue to protect them the best that we can. But we also, too, feel a little bit helpless because it's kind of starting to get, out of control.
Yeah, and it is a concern because, like we say, on college campus, you have athletes, you have non-athletes, everyone's interacting. And that's why everyone needs to get the message. Everyone needs to get the message to, hey, if you're a fan, be a good fan. I was chatting with a young man in recovery. He had graduated college, was not a student athlete, just a college student who developed a gambling problem while in college up in the Northeast in the state of Connecticut. And he said in his recovery, he's focused on putting the focus back on the storyline instead of the betting line. And I really love the way that perspective is. We have to fall back in love with the love of sports and the storyline. And if things don't go our way, okay, well, that's part of gambling, right? Don't threaten people, don't harass people, because he was one of those who would send DMs to people who lost those parlays. And he realized now in recovery that he was making bad decision after bad decision. And the athletes oftentimes were in the crosshairs. So it's important. That's why it's important that we talk to everyone. Greek life, health and wellness, student body, general student population. This is a conversation that needs to be normalized to create a campus culture of safety at the end of the day, top to bottom, leadership all the way down to the students, so that we understand and we keep people safe. In the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, that's the other area we were able to do a lot of great work in. We're thankful for the Department of Drug and Alcohol programs. So you can see where Colorado, the funding was available and it came through the Division of Gaming. In Pennsylvania, it's a little different. And that's what I think people on this webinar today need to realize. There's funding available. And if you need help kind of unlocking or locating where that is within your state, we're happy to partner with you. We see representatives from various states today, and sometimes it's through behavioral health, sometimes it's through the regulator. We can help and we can navigate that directly and work with you to help identify where those funds might be available for college age education. In Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth Division of Drug and Alcohol Programs approved our education program for county use. So Pennsylvania has over 300 NCAA Division I, II, III, and junior colleges and community colleges. That's a lot of college age individuals. And the county can request the funding directly from the state. And then the state sends the county the funding, and then we contract with the county. So you can see that that's a different process than maybe what other locations and representatives on the call might experience. I can tell you in Pennsylvania right now, we already have interest in the last month and a half since that partnership was announced. We have 24 collegiate institutions already saying, yes, we want you on campus in 2025-26. And we're working with the counties then to secure that funding so that we can go ahead and deliver that session on campus. And it's done in person, and it's done in a very tight window of time, 40 to 45 minutes. It's done using lived experience, peer-to-peer, which we use video content from college-age individuals who are either currently playing sports or retired from sport and graduated, that are still in their early 20s, to kind of send the message. So we really believe in the power of peer-to-peer connection, sharing our experience, and then highlighting those vulnerabilities, those threats, and what we're seeing. Because at the end of the day, we want to help people make their own decisions, make good decisions, and encourage them to explore that relationship with gambling. And again, each state's different. You know, we've had tremendous conversations with several states. Right now, we're in talks with 4 other states for potential funding in the coming year. And again, it's about having a dialogue and having a conversation. Ryan, one of the things we know is that, you know, gambling varies state by state, you know, since the repeal of PASPA, jurisdiction by jurisdiction. And I think it's important that we talk about the word gambling, but we also see something else that college age individuals like to do, and it's in the fantasy sports world. And usually the barrier to entry in fantasy sports is younger. It's 18 typically, as opposed to 21 for gambling. In your experience and working with athletes and non-athletes, what are you seeing in the area of fantasy sports? Are people participating? Are you seeing that to be as big of a concern as traditional forms of sports betting?
You know, I honestly, I'm glad you brought this up because again, just coming off the road yesterday at an institution and talking with the directors of compliance, they said, you know, we're loving the IC360 Pro Bet system. You know, we've been partnering with it and it's been wonderful. Every ping or every alert that we've gotten has come from Daily Fantasy. We haven't had one that came from kind of, you know, the legalized sports bet, but we're seeing Daily Fantasy and, you know, diving into it and having these conversations. You know, you see a lot, you know, of some things that are going on. And so a lot of these athletes, again, I think where the education comes in is, hey, I'm not on a sports book or I'm not on, you know, one of these apps that the NCAA says I can't do, but Daily Fantasy may be different. And so for the education, you know, what we try to do is, especially for the athlete, is to make them understand what the NCAA rules and regulations are that as it concerns them, and to make them realize that right now in the world that you're living in as an athlete, that is something go, because you know there are ways and that they can get on and do some things. But you know, in talking with the schools, you know, in working and obviously them partnering with our pro bet system and it working exactly as it's supposed to, the overwhelming vast majority of the alerts that these compliance individuals are getting is through Daily Fantasy, because student athletes still think it's not the same as me going on a major sports book and placing a bet.
And you know, you bring up a good point, because you know, IC360 as a company has their, you know, we do a lot of different things, right? And investing in integrity monitoring, prohibited better solutions, which ensures that student athletes, coaches, anyone touching athletics does not inadvertently trip themselves up, right? So we have the ability to monitor those things. And that's where the education dovetails in so nicely. You know, we can set up rules, we can put things in place, but you still need to help people understand their individual relationship. And that's where this comes in. You know, when I look at the stakeholders and the participants on the webinar today, we look at gambling through different lenses, and a person who experiences a problem with their gambling might look different. From a law enforcement perspective, it might be committing a criminal act or an illegal activity or threats or harassment, right? If you're an operator on here, you don't want people to experience gambling related harm, because that can hurt the individual, it can hurt the society, it can hurt their family. So we work to reduce that through responsible gambling or safer play messaging and support services. And for sport, a person with a problem with their gambling could lead to integrity, right? Nefarious activity, non-nefarious activity. And that's why it's so important that education covers across the board the various elements. And we're seeing great success with that state by state. Ryan, we have another minute or two left here. And again, I want to encourage people to use the chat, ask questions. If you had a question on your mind that we have not covered today, please definitely add that in. I did notice that we had some folks from Louisiana here today. It's great that you're here. I loved being down in New Orleans in December for Nickel G's. It was wonderful putting the panel together where we had our college age individual, Deshaun Hanukkah. We had Randy Livingston, and we had Eric Froten from NBC Sports. And it was a tremendous conversation. Fawn, I will get to you in one moment. Thank you for that. But Ryan, I guess in the last minute or two here, let's take a think back during this past year. And this is something that I was doing a podcast yesterday, and the host of the podcast asked me this question. I thought it was a good one. The past year, what has been a highlight? What has been one of those things this year where you came away from maybe a session or an interaction with a college age individual or a group of them where you said, that was really cool? This is why we love the work that we do. Is there anything that jumps to mind? I know I have one, but I'll let you go first if you have one top of mind.
It's one topic that I've had multiple student athletes across the nation come to me, and they've talked privately and have thanked me for, number one, our lived experience and helping them understand maybe what somebody may be going through. And based off of the talks that we've had, based off of what they've been reading and the vulnerabilities they have, that they may know of somebody that is struggling right now in their life with gambling, and that because we talk about trying to get help and having conversations, and this being a community effort, that they are now going to step up and have a conversation with that individual to make sure that they are okay and they do understand what their relationship is. And that for me is heartwarming, because Dan, like you, I obviously went through what I went through, and there's no going back and doing what I did for 16 years. But to be able to reach a person to say, hey, you know what, I think I know somebody in my life that could potentially be struggling, and even if they're not, I just want to let them know that, hey, as you're identifying what your relationship is with this thing, if you ever want to have a conversation, I'm here. And that's been the most overwhelming positive thing that I've had. I've had it across campuses. I've had multiple people come up and tell me. And for me, it's been the most rewarding thing that we've done throughout the whole year, to know that, you know what, people are starting to relate to this. And, there is a community that is out there that wants to help each other and step up and just be there for one another.
It's well said. Relatability. I think about that. When I was at a Big Ten school, during the course of the year, I had one of the student athletes come up afterwards. Some of his good friends were in fraternities. So, you have the frat house and the wagering, and always asking him for inside information. And he said that's something that's really frustrating for him. But he had recently found out that his father was going to be going to prison. And when he came up afterwards and shared with me that he identified through the story, my time in prison related to gambling, because his father was now going through the same thing. And it helped him understand that his father's not a bad person. It's just he's made some bad choices. And I think that's what we always want to help impart. Like, along the way, we're trying to teach some life skills, right? Teach patience, be thankful for the opportunity you have here while you're in school for this season of your life. But when you get out of school and you become of legal age, many people are under the age of 21, so they can't even legally bet on sports, right? Make sure that they know where to go, how to explore their relationship. And that's what he really took away. He just really appreciated the connection, as I shared my relationship with my father and then my lived experience. To echo your point, the lived experience piece plays a role. It plays a subset. It's not the whole story, right? But it helps create the color within the lines. The other piece I wanted to make mention of when we talked about prohibited better solutions and integrity monitoring, the other big piece that we talk about is athlete abuse and harassment. And we have solutions that we use, and we work collaboratively and support NCAA and the leagues. And Alert 360 is one of those products and solutions which are really helpful. And, not to talk about a product, but when you have a mechanism that you can report a harassment with a screenshot, and it gets it out of the mind of the individual, and it lets the other people take control of that, investigate it, and do what needs to be done, that only preserves integrity it also preserves mental health for the individual. And Ryan, as a big league ball player, and I'm going to get to the questions in a moment, as a big league ball player, your thoughts on that importance of just being right up here. I mean, if you're not right up here, nothing else matters, right?
100%. It doesn't matter how physically ready you are if you're not going to be there mentally because right? I mean, there were days that I played that when I was the underdog because again, I knew what my lines were if I was supposed to win or if I was supposed to lose. You knew walking into a clubhouse if I was the underdog, somebody was going to be upset with you, and you got to make sure you're mentally ready before you're physically ready. I tell the athletes that all the time.
100% right. And I just got notified here. Corey, thank you for that. I apologize. The chat is disabled. So if we can get the chat enabled, and perhaps that's what Fawn may have been trying to communicate. If we can get the chat enabled for people, you can also use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom. John, thank you for your question. Ryan, the question is, can you clarify whether the NCAA currently prohibits athletes from participating in fantasy sports wagering along with other prohibitions? That is correct. Fantasy sports is considered to be sports wagering just like pro sports. So as a student athlete, coach, staff, or anyone touching athletics, you cannot place any type of wagers or fantasy sports for which there's an NCAA championship or a path to professionalism. So that is a good question. And again, these are the questions that come up. And I've been to schools and institutions where the student will come up as a freshman, first year student, said, "Oh my gosh, I forgot to close my fantasy sports account. I was doing it with my dad. I'm 18. I'm in trouble. I'm going to lose my scholarship." I mean, they get so nervous. And again, it's working together to say, no, they're not going to just close it down, right? It's good that you're now aware of this, but it's important that we reinforce and have those conversations and messages. It's very, very important. So, John, thank you for that question. Noting that the chat is disabled, if you have a question, please raise your hand and we will look to unmute you, or use the Q&A, please, at the bottom. Corey, thank you also for that. Fawn, I'm going to unmute you or ask you to unmute. Let's see. Fawn, are you able to share? Unmuted. Okay. So please use the Q&A. I've also placed my email, and Ryan, please do the same. Place your email in the chat so people can at least see that. So parting thoughts. We have Colorado, we have the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, as we give another few moments for people to type in questions, queries, concerns, feedback. We have a few more schools in the works, states in the works to get to some colleges. What are your thoughts, even taking this back even a little bit earlier? You have kids, I have kids. Many of the people on here have children, grandchildren. Video gaming, high schools, right? Let's take a look at that. What are your thoughts about what high school age individuals are getting exposed to through the world, either video gaming or even gambling early? I mean, you're around kids, baseball teams, you're around young people. What are you seeing as a father of children?
Yeah, the proliferation kind of like you said at a younger age to gamify things, right, is kind of starting to inhibit, young minds and obviously out there in the world they're trying to figure out a way to draw in that youth audience. And so you're seeing things like loot boxes and skins, and you're able to, play for a certain amount of coins and things like that. And although kids, may not see that as gambling, there is that risk reward mechanism that is there, and it's still giving them that young dopamine rush of, hey, I did this certain thing or I completed this task and now I get my skin or I get my favorite loot box inside of whatever game that it is I'm playing. And so again, my kid is a video gamer and we monitor the things that he is doing, but I have seen, and he doesn't understand, he gets very, very excited that he participated in this quest or he participated in this game and he was able to win this character that he got. And so that's already kind of reinforcing it, in that brain that I did this thing and I won this thing. And so I think you're kind of starting to see it more at the younger age. And again, it's the normalization of everything and starting to make it seem like it's okay to be doing these things.
Yeah, and that was a message I'd received via text. So thank you for that. Kind of just talk a little bit about gaming. The other thing is that when you have a near miss, I mean, the near miss is the new win, right? It's not just it's not just a close call. It's actually a near win. And so I almost won. So now I'm going to continue to chase this and I'm going to continue to pursue it. That happens in video gaming. It happens in gambling. It happens with sports betting, happens with in-play sports wagering. We see it happening all over the place. So it's important. And these are some of the topics that we do talk with college age individuals and even high school. So if this is something that you're interested as a result of hearing today's webinar, reach out to us, follow up with us. We'll be sending out some follow-up information and just touch points so that we can further the conversation to see how we can help support you in your state, within your organization, on your campus, or within your league. We appreciate you being here today. Ryan, thank you so much. I hope you're doing well and you're back from your travels and home for a little bit as we start gearing up for a busy summer and into next fall. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll thank everybody for attending and listening. Again, our emails are in the chat. If we can help, if we can help you with anything, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Have a great day. We hope you enjoyed this and let's stay connected. Chat soon. Thank you.
Thank you all.